Sound the leak klaxon! Beta leaked details have emerged. Melodrama aside, guys, we have got 40 minutes of Dawn of War 3 beta multiplayer footage out that was released early by GameSpot, and it wouldn't surprise me if there are some more from beta players who have broken their NDA floating around the interwebs somewhere. There are also a bunch of screenshots showing details from menus, an FAQ on the pre-order details, plus pricing, and a whole slew of other details. Now, I am hoping to cover Dawn of War 3 in depth up to release and beyond, so it's probably a good idea for me not to piss off the devs. So with that in mind, I'm not going to be showing all of the leaked footage and screenshots. However, they are widely available. I laid my hands on them over at the Dawn of War 3 Reddit. However, what I have done is gone through it all, taken a load of notes, and I will break that down with some analysis for you here, and that way hopefully the details will be preserved in a slightly more legal or inoffensive way if any of that stuff does get taken down, and we can have a good old discussion in the comments as per usual. So I've got the first bit of Orc gameplay that we saw running in the background to give you guys some visual chewing gum as I ramble at length about what's been seen in the leaked details. So first things first, looking at the gameplay footage that we saw, we had two things. First of all was a 1v1 multiplayer match where the person recording from GameSpot played a Space Marine against an Eldar. The quality on this was really poor, so unfortunately I couldn't make out a lot of the text from various buildings, objectives, gameplay details. However, I still did find some pretty juicy nuggets of information. First big one, I think, and the one that seems to be generating the most controversy, is the game mode. So I think we were all expecting to see a return to the capture point gameplay that we saw, or game mode, sorry, that we saw in Dawn of War 2 and Company of Heroes, where there are 3 victory points on the map, and when you control more of the victory points than your opponent, you start to slowly eat into their victory counter until they reach 0 and you win. What we saw is nothing like that. It actually seems to be more of a copycat game mode, from taking a lot of inspiration from Dota. So the way it works is you have to destroy your opponent's power core to win the match, and in Dota terms that would be their ancient. That's sitting right on their side of the map, pretty much where they build their base. To get to the power core, you have to destroy a shield generator and a turret, which then, once they're destroyed, make the power core vulnerable. So there's obviously huge analogies with Dota here, where you see the first tier towers, which are relatively weak, the second tier towers, which are stronger, the third tier towers, which are very strong, and then the ancient, which you can destroy afterwards. Obviously, this is different because the shield generator actually can't attack. However, it's not made clear or not, but it does look like the shield generator actually gives the opponent a resource boost while it's still alive. The turret can attack. Now, the interesting thing is there's actually a pair of shield generators and a pair of turrets, and from what I saw, it looks like we don't actually have to kill all of them to access the opponent's power core and win. But what it does seem to do is that if you kill the pair, you actually get a big boost in elite points, requisition, and power. So mechanically speaking, they're definitely looking at the popularity of MOBA games and trying to infuse a bit of that into Dawn of War as a real-time strategy game, to tap into that, because obviously where real-time strategy games used to be quite popular, they've actually almost within the competitive and I suppose game development landscape been supplanted by MOBAs like Dota and League of Legends. I think a lot of people are going to kind of have prejudices about the game already, where they saw the elite units, they saw changes that were being made to the formula, they're not happy about it, and they're going to take this as confirmation of their worst fears and, you know, throw all their toys out the pram about it. I am going to reserve judgment on it because, I mean, really, apart from the idea of marginal advantage, it's very similar to what we've seen in the other Dawn of War games, where we're going out onto the map and fighting the opponent over objectives, whether they're victory points or shield generators, to beat them. The thing that potentially worries me is that because it's a strategy game, we've got resources flowing in constantly, and if your opponent has a economic advantage over you, and then they are beating you in terms of the victory condition as well, if you get resources from winning the victory condition, destroying turrets, destroying shield generators, and so on and so forth, they're also then going to be given an even greater economic or macro advantage over you. So is it going to make it turn games into a bit of a one-sided stomp where, if you're able to take out the victory condition earlier on, you're going to get an economic boost, which is going to enable you to sort of go on and win the games? Because with MOBA games, it's very frustrating that you kind of feel like you have to sit around and play a 50-minute long game when in fact the game was decided within the first 10 or 15 minutes. So that is a concern for me with this system. However, I do like that they're being innovative and trying to do things that will draw a larger crowd, and if it's balanced properly, it could work very well. Another thing to bear in mind is this is just one game mode we've seen. There's nothing to say that we're not going to have the traditional victory point mode coming back in and other game modes like Annihilation. I think the really important thing here is which of these victory modes is going to end up being the ranked gameplay mode, because that's basically what we take to be the standard way that the game is intended to be played by the developers. So this might be just them showing off a new game mode that they've been tinkering with, and ranked will remain as it always has been, or it might be that this is the new standard for the game. And I think as long as it's balanced properly, it will work perfectly well. So seeing multiplayer footage beyond the new game mode, we actually saw some more information, and that's that in multiplayer you're not only having the elites on the left, which we've already seen as a call in there, we also see in the top above the elites, that's where your super ability goes, which is obviously rocks for the orcs, orbital lasers for the space marines, and eldritch storm for the eldar. But also on the right hand side, we're going to see a selection of what are called army doctrines. Now, this was revealed via some of the screenshots that we see, and I will go into more detail on them later so I don't sort of turn myself around by skipping in between different topics. But I think those look to function very similarly to the upgrades that we could take in Company of Heroes 2, which would give slight buffs to certain units, and those were displayed to our teammates and to the enemy when we were loading into the game. So it kind of allows you to have a bit more customization and focus to your army, but also your opponent and your allies are going to know about that. So another thing that we saw here was a brand new, I believe previously unspoken of, elite character for the Space Marines, and that is the Inquisition kill team. I think they might be a Deathwatch kill team, and that is a squad of I suppose upgraded or veteran tactical troopers that come with 2 upgrades that can change the way they fight. So the upgrades seem to be based on the different branches of the Inquisition, because I saw one of them was called Malleus Tactics or something similar, and gave the Inquisition kill team a beefed up flamethrower, where the flamethrower for the tac squad I think is usually an ability that you cast in a cone. For these guys, it was a weapon that they fired constantly, and it released a huge gout of flame that seemed to be really effective at taking down standard infantry targets. It seemed to be a pretty close run thing in a head-to-head ranged fight between them and Maka, for some reference. There also seemed to be an ability where once members of the squad were down, you could actually teleport them out of the battlefield and resummon them later to return with full health. So that's something to notice as well. Perhaps there'll be a bit more of kind of a skirmish force. So also within the Space Marine gameplay, we saw that above the control panel on the left, we saw 4 icons. 3 of those were drop pods. Right from the beginning of the game, one of the drop pods is unlocked. So you can actually, when you're building a unit, select for it to be constructed in the drop pod, and then that can be called into the battlefield wherever you've got vision. However, it does look as though it takes longer for the unit to be constructed if it's constructed in a drop pod, and the cooldown on the drop pod is pretty significant, so it looked like it was around 150 seconds. However, as I say, the video quality wasn't great, so I can't be sure. Next to the drop pods were what looks like the chapter standard, and the icon for the chapter standard changed every time the upgrade was the tech level for the Space Marine was upgraded. So I didn't actually see them use it, but I'm guessing the chapter standard is something that you can call in and plant on the battlefield, which will then buff your units around it. But I think I remember reading somewhere that it can also be taken by the enemy. So it's kind of a risk-reward moment, and I think it's awesome because it's going to provide some really, I suppose, dynamic and cinematic gameplay, and it brings me right back to the first cinematic trailer we saw for Dawn of War 1, where the Space Marines are fighting the Orcs, and one battered sergeant fights his way to the top of a hill to plant the chapter standard, which then calls in all the other drop pods to commence the planet's invasion. So very happy to see that included, and I'm curious to find out exactly what buff it'll give and what the penalty is if that falls into enemy hands. So the first map that we saw, or the 1v1 map that we saw, looked like it was based on a space station tile set. It was very industrial. There was lots of kind of narrow claustrophobic lanes, and it looked roughly as though the map was divided into 3 lanes across it, which was very reminiscent of Dawn of War 2's map design. The few more sort of scatty details are that elites can only be called down within a radius of other units. Angelos was called into the battlefield in a drop pod, which seemed to stun and knock back units. The generator, or the shield generators for the power core, can take a real beating in the early game. Although they can't defend themselves, it took the Inquisition Death Squad elite unit plus I think 3 other squads of Space Marines over a full minute of beating on it with plasma guns and flamethrowers to kill it. So in terms of pace, I don't think it's something that we're going to see people Zerg rushing to take out as an objective, because it will give you lots of time to react to actually defend your shield generator. There also looked like there were certain cover points, which are these kind of shielded areas that our units can capture and occupy around the map. And again, the video quality was poor, but it looked like this particular area, as long as you had a unit in it, actually gave you an increase to your requisition income. So I suppose that as a mechanic seems to function pretty similarly to the gold resource bases that we saw in StarCraft 2, and they encourage you not to turtle up and to get out and claim them. And I'm a big fan of this from a game design perspective, because I think it really helps to show players the advantage and reward them economically for getting out into the map early on and skirmishing and fighting over contested resource locations like this. We also saw the Eldar ultimate ability, the Eldritch Storm, used in both of the videos, and it looks fantastic. It's a funnel of psychic energy that comes from the top of the screen and widens out into an area over the ground, and it's constantly whipping back and forth, fluctuating. It's red and black and really menacing looking, and has lightning sort of crackling all over it. In terms of its gameplay effect, it seems to slow down any units that are caught within its effect, and it does damage over time. Interestingly, the damage over time is quite minor to start off with, but it looks like it is then increased as units stay within it, and it can end up being quite serious. And I saw some units having nearly half of their health or being completely killed by it across the video. In the first 1v1 video that we saw, the Wraith Lord marches into a pretty powerful blob of Space Marine infantry. However, none of them have anti-vehicle weapons. There are some of them with plasma, which I suppose counts as light anti-vehicle, but none dedicated with las cannons. And oh boy, do you need proper anti-vehicle weapons to take out a Wraith Lord. It charged in and absolutely annihilated all of them. I mean, not in such a way that it looked unfair or overpowered, but they really didn't have any answer to it. It was able to hack through 3 or 4 squads of non-anti-vehicle infantry, and then also Knight Solaria was called down, and it managed to chop through her, though she wasn't concentrating fire on it. So from that sort of little exchange, it looks like Solaria is going to be very much kind of a crowd control, anti-blob, anti-infantry force, and is not going to be great for focusing down large vehicle units like the Wraith Lord. However, there was a Dreadnought called in a drop pod in the middle of the fight, and it did seem to fare much better against the Wraith Lord. So final couple of pieces of information. First of all, it looks like any Space Marine unit can be constructed in a drop pod, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be deployed by drop pod, but towards the end of the video we see a Predator Annihilator is ordered to be constructed in the drop pod sort of menu. So I'm guessing that would actually be dropped off by a Thunderhawk. However, it's worth noting that the Space Marines ability allows them to basically call in whatever they need kind of on the fly, or have it there kind of as an ace in the hole, shall we say, because you couldn't just be in the middle of a fight and say, oh crap, I need a Predator Annihilator, and then click it and it's there. It still has to build, and it takes longer to build when it's going to be built for putting in a drop pod. However, you can kind of have it there ready and perhaps deploy it behind your enemy or on their flank or something like that. So that opens up a lot of really interesting gameplay and tactical possibilities. Also, we saw a piece of destructible terrain or a destructible object within the map that was the control panel to a bridge that opened up a new kind of lane of attack for the Space Marine player. So I thought that was a really nice little touch and an extension of what we saw again in StarCraft 2, where they had boulders that could be destroyed to open up new paths through the map. Obviously, this is a little bit more lore appropriate and looked really nice, so I'm glad to see them employing that and sort of borrowing from and improving on pieces of design that we've seen in not only MOBAs but also other successful and popular RTSs. So the second piece of gameplay we saw was a 2 versus 2 where there was an Orc and an Eldar playing together. So the person playing from GameSpot was playing as an Orc, and right at the beginning he gave us some really interesting information that there are actually strategic points on the map which boost your income of elite points. So he made the point that he rushed straight in the beginning of the game to capture the strategic outpost that gave him elite points and sort of built his base and fortifications around that, so deploying war towers and building his production structures slightly further up the field. So I really like that we can build our structures pretty much anywhere on the field, because obviously having units come straight out of the structure and into the fight quicker could make all the difference, particularly at a higher level of play. But also it brings with it added potential vulnerabilities of doing that, and so that's a whole nother level of kind of strategic decision making and thought that has to go into it. So for me, that can only bode well. And also the fact that we're seeing elite points as kind of a resource on the map that can be fought over is a very interesting point as well, because as far as I can tell, it actually doesn't cost any resources other than elite points to call in your elites, and when they die you can just call them back in for free. So that makes them a very powerful asset to have, although I'm still not actually concerned about the idea of them being kind of overpowered and turning the game into a MOBA where it's more about microing them and the army as a side piece, because in all the gameplay we've seen, the elites have very much been kind of a force enhancer rather than something that is sort of carrying the fight on its own, and they can be overpowered by normal units and better economy and map control based on what we've seen so far. So one thing I was able to notice with the higher quality of the 2v2 video was the map design via the mini-map. And this video showed a much more kind of rocky tile set that looked really nice. And it was also a lot more open. There was still kind of a vague lane feel akin to what we saw in Dawn of War 2. However, it did seem a lot more open and kind of natural as opposed to the corridor feel of the space station map. Another thing to note was that there seemed to be about 10 resource points on the map that could be captured. So that was 4 in a relatively safe location for each team to grab at the beginning of the game, and 2 that were kind of in the middle of the map and were obviously going to be under contention. And again, I like this because it sort of encourages a more aggressive play style to the victors of spoils and encourages you to get out there and actually fight over control of the battlefield, and punishes players for sitting back and turtling too much. So when they were playing the Orcs, where the Space Marines had their drop pods and the chapter standard displayed, they actually had an indication of their tech level based on how many WAR banners they had up. So the maximum tech level, it looks like, is 5. And every time you construct a WAR banner, another one of the symbols lights up, showing that you've got more tech available to you. And also, I'm not sure if that then ties into the WAR mechanic and how that actually allows you to then trigger a WAR and buff all your units, but it might also feed into that area of the game as well. Another little detail that I noticed was that Gretchins, the Orc builder unit, actually are able to move in stealth as long as they're not attacking, being attacked, or capturing a point or something like that. So I thought that was a really nice touch because it allows you to obviously bring them along to utilize the scrap that's left over on the battlefield to repair your vehicles, but also you can kind of use them as scouts, which is nice because obviously they're the most kind of diminutive and expendable orcs around, and orcs aren't, broadly speaking, very good at stealth, so it makes sense to have the Gretchins to fill that role. So one thing I noticed as well was the Shooter Boy scrap upgrade. We've seen before that it gives them the ability to throw stick grenades. However, what it didn't show previously was that the stick bombs are actually thrown passively at whichever target the Shooter Boy is throwing at, and it deals out some sort of disruption by knocking back enemies or stunning them. So Knobs came out at Tech 3, so when the Orc had 3 WAR towers up, and their upgrade allowed them to throw a chopper which immobilized an enemy. They also have a charge and are able to taunt the enemy, and that was something that I saw as kind of a theme throughout the Orc army, was that certain units are able to charge and slow or charge and taunt enemy units to kind of allow the rest of the army, which is probably going to be kind of a bit lumbering and perhaps not as fast as certain Eldar or Space Marine units, to actually bring them to bear. Another unit that had the charge and the ability to slow was the Killer Can. And interestingly, the Killer Can also has an ability that when it dies in an area around where it died, the ground becomes fiery and deals damage to enemy units that are there over time. We also saw a new 7-point Orc Elite, which was the Mad Dread. So I'm not sure if he's kind of a character or upgraded Killer Can or Death Dread, but based on the fact that he's 7 points, I'm guessing he's obviously some sort of vehicle and will perform better than the regular Death Dreads or Killer Cans that you can call out of the Mech Boy shop. Also, I noticed that you're able to upgrade the duration of the effect of the WAR from the pile of guns, which contains all of the upgrades for the Orcs. There was a sort of fight sequence over an objective where Wraith Guards were deployed against a sort of blob of Orc units that had a truck with them, and I noticed that the Wraith Guard D cannons seemed to do kind of alright damage with AoE against infantry, but where they really shone was as an anti-vehicle unit, and they absolutely tore the Orc truck apart. So perhaps they're going to be more of a dedicated, heavy-hitting anti-vehicle unit. But it's kind of interesting to think where that puts them in terms of the Shadow Spectres that the Eldar are able to bring out, which are obviously very powerful, dedicated anti-vehicle units. Another thing I noticed was that the Orcs were actually able to reinforce from an Eldar Falcon grav tank that their teammate brought over to join a fight with them. So I think that pretty much confirms that we will be able to share reinforcement points with our teammate in team games, which will probably lead to some fairly interesting strategies for teching and bringing to bear the best units of each faction and minimizing their sort of disadvantages by relying on the units of other factions. We also see in the 2v2 video the Morkanaut Beauty called in, and the Eldar Wraith Knight that is in a range configuration with two sort of very powerful lance weapons, and they both looked fantastic. The Wraith Knight looked appropriately kind of menacing and graceful, whereas Beauty, the Morkanaut, was lumbering and ridiculous, and also kind of powerful looking, really chunky. But one thing that was kind of brought to light from this was that the Eldar Wraith Knight is probably by far the biggest unit in the game. It is absolutely huge, and I would say, although it's slimmer, it's almost twice the size of the Morkanaut. So that was everything I was able to get from the gameplay videos. There were also a bunch of screenshots that were mostly looking at the menus released as well, and one of the first details that I spotted from this and was very happy to see as well was that the army painter is back and it looks just as good as it ever was. So you can select from pre set up color schemes for all the various Space Marine chapters, Orc clans, Eldar crafts worlds, and you can also make your own ones. You can select from a primary, secondary and tertiary color, as well as trim and also an insignia, and it looks like there are absolutely loads of colors to choose from. What was interesting is that some of the color schemes and some of the paints were actually had a padlock symbol on them and were locked, and in the bottom right hand side of the screen you could see there was some sort of currency called skulls that I'm guessing you could use to unlock the new paint schemes, and they might even be used to unlock something like elites as well. This could be kind of a microtransaction thing. It wouldn't surprise me to see that. It's just become kind of a standard for games now, and you know, agree with it or disagree with it, it's kind of here to stay, so it's not worth talking about too much. Just the important thing is that it remains in the realms of cosmetics and doesn't impact gameplay in a way that gives one player an advantage or the ability to win after another player. And I suppose also that it's fair in terms of the amount of time that you can earn these through playing, and you aren't actually going to be forced to spend money on it, which would kind of suck because as will be revealed later, the game is going to be fairly expensive. Now, when I was actually recording this video, the pre-order screenshot that I'd seen was a leak, but during the course of recording it, they have actually now gone live with the pre-order and the various details of the bonus tiers. So I can confirm, and you can all easily find out, that the launch date is April 27th, which is just under 2 months away, and I'm super excited for that. And also the pricing tiers are going to be £55 for the basic edition, £60 for the elite edition, and £100 for the legendary edition. And there are going to be pre-order bonuses with that in the form of cosmetic skins for the elites from the Space Marines, Orcs and Eldar. Beauty the Morkanaut gets a new black paint job with a big kind of truck grill on the front that has flames coming out of it and looks pretty cool. Wraith Knight Taldir, which is the melee version of the Wraith Knight, now comes all in white with what looks like a new sword and gold trim and detailing all over the body, which looks fantastic. And Solaria now comes in gunmetal with bronze detailing and engraving all over, and also new modelling work that puts spikes all over her guns and rocket pods on her back, and also gives her a new faceplate and crown. So I think that's pretty cool. There's obviously, the whether or not to pre-order is a contentious issue, but if you want to, that's going to give you some pretty cool visual rewards at least, and I like that they're keeping it strictly visual. So the last big piece of info we have from these leaks is that the elites for your army will have their own tab on the main menu, and there is a lot of customization to be done around them. So we saw the Space Marines on the elite tabs, and they have 5 different elites within the beta version at least, which was Gabriel Angelos, Jonah Orion, the Librarian, Knight Solaria, the Inquisition Kill Team, and also a squad of Assault Terminators. Now, the interesting thing was that it looks like there are not only different visual customizations that we can make on our elites, but there are also doctrines that they can select, and they seem to have a leveling bar that gave them access to 10 different unlocks. Now, I think these unlocks actually happen outside of the game. So the more you play with a certain elite, the more you level them up, and permanently across games, and then you get access to these doctrines which come with the elite, or in fact it unlocks army doctrines. And I think I also saw a paint shade that you could unlock that way as well. So that's a really interesting point, and as long as it's all kept kind of fair and balanced, I think that's a nice kind of little progression treadmill for us to go through. But obviously there is the concern that you're going to have certain units that are locked behind elites that you have to either pay for or unlock, or those elites might not be unbalanced themselves, but they might come with a doctrine or some sort of unit ability that is then too good, or kind of becomes flavour of the month and makes it much easier for one player to win. But obviously let's not jump to conclusions because it hasn't happened yet, and I like to think that Relic will do a pretty good job balancing it. The example we saw with the Assault Terminators was that you could either select between the ability for them to give a Dreadnought a charge, which is then followed up by a slam, or for them to give Tactical Marines the ability to throw frag grenades. So you can see that that's actually quite impactful on the gameplay, and will make for some really interesting tactical choices, and bring a lot of individual flavour to the play styles of different players depending on what they decide to take in terms of their elite choices, and then the doctrines that they select for those elites. But obviously there's also the chance that that could be kind of balanced incorrectly, or in such a way that it becomes kind of pay to win, or an annoying or flavour of the month. That is, of course, assuming that new elites are going to be unlockable with money, but I can't see that not being the case. So guys, that's kind of all the information that I got from those leaks, and also from the fact that the pre-order and release date are now out. If you have stuck around for the full half an hour ramble of me going through all this information, first of all, good job. I feel sorry for your ears, and second of all, thank you so much for staying around and listening, and I hope it was useful and gave you some insight into what we're actually going to be seeing in Dawn of War 3. If you did enjoy the video, please do feel free to drop me a like. It always helps the channel grow. And if you'd like to see more content like this, and also gameplay when I can actually do it on Dawn of War 3, please subscribe to the channel, because I will be covering it in depth, and up to release and past release. If you've got any criticism, constructive criticism, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm always really receptive to that. I'm sure there's plenty to criticise with this video, being that it's basically a half an hour long ramble, but I did want to get this information out and available to you guys as quickly as possible. Either way, I hope you enjoyed it, and I've been the Discerning Gamer. Until next time.